Well, listener or viewer, this is us back again. I'm
Okay,
here
okay.
and Pat's far away, but we are spiritually bound as one, really, Pat. Would you say that?
Aren't we
Spiritually
just?
and emotionally. So we're going to bring light and goodness to the world. However, we're going to start with a kind of a sad thing because this is the 14th, isn't it, Pat? Is this the 14th? Yeah, this is
Yeah,
the
tomorrow's
14th of August, and tomorrow is the anniversary of the Omagh bomb, which went off in
yeah,
my hometown. And
yeah,
I was looking at a photograph of myself and my good wife standing in a group of people in a demonstration shortly after it. And I say I looked stunningly young, although I
yeah.
must have been about 40 at the time. Anyway, the Omagh bomb. Is there much more to be said about the Omagh bomb? I mean, it was a terrible thing to happen. It shattered
Jude,
Omagh.
no, Jude, I don't think there's a lot either of us can say that's new, but what you can say is it was an awful atrocity.
Hmm.
29 people dead, apparently 300 injured. What about 16 of those who died were no, basically under, I think, 25. And
Yeah.
you could keep going on. And the legacy that is left, that the years that
Hmm.
have gone on, so many people dead and injured,
Yeah.
and people
Yeah.
who have lifelong disfigurements and all that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
just for what? 4 months earlier,
Oh,
they'd signed the Friday Agreement. So
yeah.
what was the point? The whole thing too, Jude, and I know you've got a lot of people saying what exactly went on in the background, and there have been all sorts of rumblings between police and intelligence services, and I know phone calls and missing phones and all that. There are people who say that the real cover up was the fact that the cops or the intelligence service messed up here, that they knew what was happening. But anyway, it doesn't matter. All that sort of stuff is by and by. Tomorrow, for many
Mm,
people,
mm,
it will be
mm.
the fact that they're no longer,
Yeah.
and they're all getting older, Jude, and so on. And like Jude, it's for Oma, it'll be a day that will never ever be forgotten.
That's right. Yeah, I see them. I see the effects on people, even when I go there now. I mean, it's not overt, but there's a certain flatness maybe about the town. I often think, but then maybe I'm
Yeah,
projecting my own thoughts onto it. I think that point about background stuff and like to what extent the police might have known or agents of the police might have known. Again, I think that's
yeah,
not hasn't been sufficiently investigated. I just make one point now, and I hope people won't misinterpret me. And that is, if you look at the pattern of the real IRA bombings before that, in none of them, was it Ballygolly or somewhere that they attacked previous to
I think
that?
so.
They destroyed buildings, uh, but no, there was no human beings hurt, as far as I know. Certainly none killed. My guess is that the real IRA had intended that to be the same kind of operation in Omagh, but it got screwed
Yeah,
up either through their lack of clarity as to where the bomb was or the mixed messages they were getting or whatever. I would just simply say that the real IRA aren't as stupid as to think that killing 30 people, innocent people,
it's a
would be
smart move.
good PR for them. So I
Well, it
would say
destroyed them, really. Yeah,
yeah. So I think we should keep that in mind when we say how terrible the deed was. It was shocking beyond measure. But I think there is an important difference between people who would set out to kill 30 people or more and people who would endanger the lives of 30 people or more by bringing a bomb into a main street. Would you agree with
yeah.
that?
The only thing is, and I'll tell you where most people say I don't give a monkey's either way. They shouldn't have bought the bomb, and
That's right. Oh,
that's the
I'd
bottom
agree.
line.
I'd agree with that too. Yeah.
No, no, I know. I'm making the point that you're making exactly the same.
Mm.
The, hey, the Good Friday Agreement had been signed. It should have been given an opportunity. They should have just left it alone. And the tragedy is whether the real IRA messed up, the intelligence service messed up, whether the phone messages got garbled. I don't know.
Mm.
But the reality is tomorrow, a lot of
Yeah.
people in Omagh will have a very somber day.
Yeah, yeah. Well, God be good to the people that died, and God be good to the people that are trying to cope with the grief still. Okay, let's move on, Pat. We're going to try to keep this in not as long as it used to be, and not as short as it used to be, but in between about 30 minutes. Now, we were talking about slaughter in Omagh many years ago, decades ago. The Féile is coming under some Féile and Fubble in Belfast. Some people call it that, and some people call it the West Belfast Festival. And it's getting a lot of flack because on the last night, the Wolf Tones traditionally sing rebel songs, or well, they do what the Wolf Tones do. And one of the things that for the lines of the songs is "Ooh Ah Up the Ra." Now, Nolan spent the entire show, as far as I could tell, talking about this, or at least a substantial part of it, and saying it was scandalous, and it was, for example, the son of Colin Parry. Were they saying that they were cheering the Ra on to do what they did to that 6-year-old or 10-year-old boy? What are your thoughts on the Pat?
Good. I regard Aaah Up the Ra as up on a par with Aaah Up Manchester United type thing. I think young people are just saying it, and I think sometimes they're doing it deliberately in a way like sticking up the middle finger to the establishment in Northern Ireland and to people like Nolan. Like most of those young people have zero knowledge of what happened in the past. They're out for a night. I saw a thing this morning. They were singing "Summer of '69," know the Bryan Adams song, and they were
Oh,
all
yes.
singing along. Jude, I don't. I think it's basically just part of the panoply of what the Féile is all about, and I think it's almost become the way "Land of Hope and Glory" is the end of the proms. I think "Ooh Ah Up the Ra" is nearly part and parcel of the Féile. It's
Yeah.
just. I think it's just something they do now, and they know it annoys the hell out of people, and it's maybe in a way, Jude, too. It's held in West Belfast. It's not, and by the way, Jude, these people do not. All they do is the last nights of the Féile, they sing "Ooh Ah Up the Ra." They don't go out and hit anybody. They don't attack anybody. They're singing. End of story.
Yeah. Well, I'm not allowing you to end it there because I think there's a couple of other points I'd like to make. And one of them is they're saying "Up the Ra," which suggests they're supporting the IRA, but the IRA doesn't exist anymore. So they're expressing support for something that doesn't exist. The second thing I would say is there was a businessman attacked during an apprentice boys parade in Derry. What was it at the weekend? On Saturday?
Yeah, the apprentice boys. Saturday.
He was Gemma Lynch said her father Damien was kicked in the head outside his shop on Spencer Road in the waterside area of the city on Saturday during an apprentice boys march.
Was that, by the way, Jude, can I interrupt you? Was that mentioned on Nolan?
No, it wasn't. Well, it may well have featured very centrally after I switched off the radio. But I listened to a fair bit of Nolan this morning, and there wasn't a murmur of it. Yeah. So once again, we have what you or I might say, at least at worst, slightly sticking it to the establishment or to unionism with "Up the Ooh Ah Up the Ra," and we have somebody who's a businessman getting his head kicked in. And it's not mentioned. This seems to me just unspeakable. Things can't go on like that. They really can't go on like that. That kind of prioritizing of slogans against people being...
Nolan's show seems to be all the time, this sort of like, what do you call the guy who died, the American guy, the shock TV guy, it doesn't matter. Anyway, it's based all the time on how much outrage I can get railed up on air and see how many listeners will ring in. And it's all grist to them all. Jude, were the wee girls from the Irish soccer team after they qualified for the World Cup? Remember they sang, like, Jude, if you look at those wee girls, they hadn't a notion. What it was just another song. And a lot of the stuff, like, Jude, see if a lot of those people wouldn't have even voted Sinn Féin. And I'm presuming a lot of the people last night at the Féile have different political viewpoints. Jude, as far as I can see or interpret, "Ooh Ah Up the Ra" has almost become a tradition at the Féile. And it's almost like sticking up either a middle finger or two fingers at the establishment. And they know the reaction they're going to get, and they sit back and enjoy Nolan and all the and I don't think it's got anything to do with support for the IRAs. It's basically, it's not pissing off the establishment.
You can't support a non-existent organization. But I'll say this, you see, and this is probably where Nolan and myself might agree. I believe that during the Troubles, that the clear majority in West Belfast would have either passively or actively supported the IRA. And the reason I say that is because the IRA couldn't have existed. Guerrilla armies don't exist except they've got the support of the community around them to one extent or another. And I would say that the majority of people in West Belfast, and probably Bogside as well, would have been supportive of the IRA in general. There would be incidences that they would be very opposed to, but by and large, they would have supported it. Anyway, that's yesteryear. We're talking about now, and as you say, people who weren't born are singing a few words about an institution that doesn't exist or an organization that doesn't exist anymore. The thing's ridiculous. But well, we'll leave this, but I give you a few words from the English national anthem. O Lord our God, scatter our enemies and make them fall. Confound their politics, frustrate their knavish tricks. On thee our hopes we fix. God save us all. Now, in other words, if you're not pro-British, God is going to get you. That's not a problem. It's not a problem if that part of the national anthem. You know,
remember Joan Baez used to have a song with God on our side?
That's right. Yeah, well, that fits right in. Okay, I think we've dealt enough with that. We're keeping a sharp eye on the time here. That very well sums up that one. Are you as outrageous as I am about that coverage of that guy getting kicked in the head?
Well, here's my problem. I don't listen to Nolan, just bad for my blood pressure.
No, but he wasn't on Nolan. No, this is the kicking in the head that wasn't on Nolan.
No, Jude, I've noticed for a long time, things like that are passed over, and it's part of maybe a news bulletin, and it's done in a factual way. And then when we come to the outrage things, it's never mentioned. We go to Derry and sort of get somebody on and say, like the apprentice boys they were urinating outside his shop, which apparently they were doing. And
yes, that's right. And so on. Trying to clean up.
So and then he got his head kicked. Why didn't he send somebody down and why didn't they do a piece on that and have a bit of outrage about that? That a lot of people on the waterside have to close their shops when these guys are going past because of the threat and and the intimidation and whatever. A lot of band people are perfectly well behaved, but there's a lot of them pissed out of their minds.
That's true. That's true. And they are allowed to free march through Derry. It's not just the waterside. They're the nationalist majority.
They're accommodated.
Accommodate them. Okay, let's move on and see those people who want to maybe put a few layers of bricks on the border wall. Sammy Wilson last week said Leo Varadkar needs to mind his own business, stay in Dublin, keep his nose out of Northern Ireland affairs. You'd support that, of course, Pat, I think, would you?
Absolutely. No, do you remember we mentioned on Friday about the photograph of Leo with the Linfield top with Varadkar and all the rest of it? I remember I referred to him as
Give us that joke again. Say it again. Say it again.
I said they've signed an offensive right winger. He's going to attack. But anyway, halfway, Leo was doing great, and Linfield had up on the big board, welcome, Linfield FC welcomes Leo Varadkar, which I thought wouldn't have happened a few years ago. Anyway, it was all going swimmingly, but Leo was then asked by the assembled throng of media folks what about the Stormont thing, and he says, well, if Stormont is not back in action by the autumn, that the two governments will have to examine Plan B. Now, he didn't spell out what Plan B is. That's why I was going to ask the question, what is Plan B? But anyway, he said it, and Sammy Wilson and Jim Allister both, I noticed on Twitter, were having a go about the fact, mind his own business. So anyway, Jude, what's Plan B?
Well, I would say Plan B, he doesn't want to commit himself too much, but it is, of course, the two governments working together. Britain is the primary sort of ruler, as it were, of the North in the absence of a local assembly. However, each time that it comes to that, the role of the South is becoming bigger each time. So I suppose Leo was talked about the need for the two governments to work hand in glove. I would think that the Tory party would sort of stand clear of that. But I think Varadkar's making it clear that if you want to keep the South out of your business, so to speak, you're not being very smart. If you're not going to have an assembly, we're going to be more involved in direct rule.
Here, this is maybe worth another 2 months. Why do people like Jim Allister Jamie Bryson, and so on, keep saying to Dublin to keep your fingers out of the pie. Yet
Yeah.
they're not going to bring Stormont back. Do they think the nationalist people are just going to sit there and let them call every shot every which way?
Well, there is a tradition which extends beyond Jamie Bryson or Jim Allister of seeing the South as separate and different. I'll tell you, I remember when I used to do what it says in the papers on Radio Ulster, BBC. And I'm not even sure that they got the Southern papers, to be honest with you. I can't remember. They may have. But there was an unwritten code that you weren't, I mean, nobody said it. It was perfectly clear that you didn't deal with events in the South. The government might have fallen in the South, but that didn't matter. You must keep your eye on the North.
That brings us on to the other point that I sent on to you. John Taylor last week. There was two wee girls killed in Clonus a couple of weeks back, and he said that the BBC had prioritised the 2 girls in Clonus over a road deaths in the north. And then he brought up the one about a massive drug fine in Rosslare, and he said, "I'm glad to hear that Rosslare is now in Northern Ireland." The implication being that it shouldn't have been on the BBC Northern Ireland News. So what are you reading into that? In other words, is he suggesting that events that Ireland, Northern Ireland, the north of Ireland, it's like sort of North Korea, that it can be shut off from the rest of the world, and we only comment on the things that suit us?
Yeah. Well, I know way, Pat. I'm just an old softy, but I think I kind of understand.
The softest part of you use your teeth.
What? What?
The softest part of you use your teeth.
In a way, you see, I sympathize with Taylor. I mean, sympathize is too strong a word, but I can see what he's getting at. And I can see what that TUV councillor was getting at about the BBC covering soccer and covering GAA games. Those things don't mean that the North isn't still an integral part of the UK. But I think there's little doubt that it does encourage people to think about Ireland, North and South. And just to think of Ireland as a unit. It's even down to how they present the weather forecast. If the weather forecast stops at the border, as well,
I've seen that.
Then they're happy with that, and they're saying, well, they justify and say, well, but we're broadcasting for the people of Northern Ireland. If they go across the border and do the whole of Ireland, in a way, that's sort of edging people towards thinking, maybe at a subconscious level, that Ireland is one unit. I would think that's at the back of what John Taylor and our friend Mr. Kyle was saying about the coverage. And GAA games have fallen to the same category. In the old days, he kept it clear. No GAA was even mentioned. And times have changed. So would you concede that they have a point when they say that this is sort of encroaching on the sovereignty of the north of Ireland?
Oh, absolutely.
Northeastern Ireland,
Northeast Ireland. Due to the famous story of that when Down got to the All Ireland final for the first time in 1960, about 30,000 people from the north travelled down to Dublin to watch the match. A BBC Ulster didn't even send a reporter. At the 5 o'clock, they had a one-line sentence, and Down have won the GAA All Ireland Championship, and here's the weather. That was basically how they covered it.
Yeah.
It's almost as long. And remember, there was a woman called Liz Curtis. She wrote a great book about Ireland and the propaganda, where she said basically, and it's a phrase I've always remembered. She says the Unionist government and the BBC worked hand in glove, and to make sure that the border between North and South was as wide as the Atlantic Ocean.
Well, Joe Brawley tells the story about when the Derry team won the All Ireland in 1993, I think it was, that they had a reception of some kind for them. And I think it was Jim Wells, of the DUP, said to him, well, I want to congratulate Mr. Brawley and his colleagues for bringing the Sam Maguire Cup back to Londonderry. And Joe was totally disgusted by that. I mean, he in fact, he used that as a sign that there were people simply irredeemable, and as a result, that the middle classes in Catholicism among the Catholics and
just about had a belly full.
And I'm not sure maybe it didn't overtalk that, you know. That's Jim Wells. Jim's sort of like that. Same as Jim Alister's the kind of guy he is, and Jamie Bryson's the kind of guy he is. I don't think we should necessarily read into that the Catholic middle classes are now pro-United Ireland. I think they are for pro-United Ireland, but it's not for things like that. They know what those guys are like. I think their reasons for it would be probably more solid than that. But it does give you a little glimpse, doesn't it, into the kind of thinking. Like he had Nolan had Alistair on for considerable time this morning, and when after the next time I switched on, it was just the end, and Jamie Bryson was holding forth, announcing the doom that was going to fall on the West Belfast Festival for some obscure reason I didn't quite get. So I think we should maybe be speaking out more loudly against the extent to which not there is coverage of the GAA, but that we have got a current affairs program which ignores a man being kicked and injured at his own shop because people urinating during an apprentice boys' march. I would have thought that you really don't have to. Well, you're a news man, you would know which is more important.
Unless they did cover it and you didn't notice, Jude, but so we need to put that proviso on.
Well, that's true. That's true. But I'll bet you here. I'll go risky. I'll bet you £10 it wasn't.
I don't know, Jude. I don't.
Would you take that bet, Pat? That's how confident you are.
Take a bet, surely. Jude. I think basically in Nolan, and it's only a personal opinion, but it's my view that they've reached a stage that it's aimed purely almost at loyalist outrage.
Yeah. Okay, so we're left now with about 10 minutes at the most. So what do you want to go to next, Pat?
Well, there's a very interesting thing in the Irish Times this morning that the government are planning an 8.6 billion. Now, I'm just going to say that slowly. 8.6 billion euro for a housing programme. And they're going to give it to the Land Development Agency. The Land Development Agency in the South is a sort of a government sort of sponsored body who are going to build on public lands. Now, I don't know how much public lands there is in this country, but anyway, bottom line is they looked for 1.25 billion quite recently, but now apparently they're talking about giving them multiples of that because Jude, I don't know how much you listen to RT, but say this last 2-3 years, there was just non-stop coverage of the housing crisis. People being found dead in the street, children living in hotel rooms. What do you call overcrowding, rents being unaffordable, mortgages through the roof, etc. I could keep going, but you get the picture there. So now apparently the government are seriously saying, according to the figures, we up until recently we needed something like 33,000 new houses per year. And the government now saying that is actually an underestimate. We need about 40,000 new houses a year. And so the 8.6 billion is going to be taken from the sovereign fund and given to the Land Development Agency to develop these houses. It's big politics, Jude. And one final point, because I'm going on too long here, is that I think there's two things. Obviously, it's to meet the need, certainly, but they're not going to leave the money for Sinn Féin if they get into government next year, and they get all the kudos for building all the houses. Anyway, I've spoken long enough.
Yeah, I think you're right, actually, Pat. But I would put a more emphasis not so much on leaving money that could be used by Sinn Féin if they're elected into government, but trying to head Sinn Féin's trump card off by building houses. Is it physically possible, do you think, over the next year and a half for them to solve the housing crisis? I don't think
not a hope in hell. Not a hope in hell, Jude. In fact, it's like a whistling in the wind. Jude, my youngest son made a very good point. He says, "Dad, I see this what do you call it? When they did the census there quite recently." He says he lives in Letterkenny, and he says, "I don't think for a second it's anywhere near accurate." He says the number of people that have come into this town is off the scale. Dude, I think the South is growing at a rate. There's 92,000 Ukrainians in the Republic. Apparently, the last day I heard someone on the radio, 92,000 in the space of about a year and a half. Dude,
are you blaming the immigrants for the lack of housing?
No. Dude, the crisis was already quite severe before refugees came here, and it's got worse. Dude, our hospitals are overcrowded, schools overcrowded, and the housing market is seriously overcrowded.
Okay, Pat, your time is up because did a short version, and there was a clamour of at least two voices saying, "No, this is too short. We want longer." And we're in middle of the road people, so we have not made it short, not made it long, but just nicely modulated.
I think that's the first time either me or you have been described as middle of the road.
Middle of the road, dangerous place to be. Anyway, thanks, Pat.
Right, Sid.
Enjoy your week.
Thanks, Sid. Good.